Hey guys, Youngblood with you, and today we're going to go ahead and do the long overdue conclusion to picking the right light fighter. Now, where we left off was with two ships that needed covering still, which is going to be the Banu Defender and the Aspiria Glaive, and then we'll jump into the overall recommendations. So if we start off with the Defender, you have an interesting craft, because it's technically a two-man vessel, but since all of the weaponry is pilot-controlled, we'll lump it into this video for review. The Defender is of alien design. It kind of looks like a crab. It has a small interior, which a lot of ships on this list don't come with, and two cockpits. Now the idea is that the Banu are individuals that specialize to a very high degree. So they would have one of their people that flies and the other person that shoots, which is an interesting lore piece. However, in practicality, especially with fixed weapons, that basically means that you have one person sitting there saying pew 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 pew, pulling a trigger, and not really adding a lot of value. So for all intents and purposes, it's a single person fighter. $220 makes the Defender the second highest price on this list to purchase, so deciding if this is the right ship for you means that you really need to factor in everything together since the value per price is lower overall. The Defender, like the Saber, has 4 size 3 hardpoints, which if you opt to run repeaters ends up at 611 DPS, which is on the higher end of the list. While still being outclassed by ships like the Buccaneer, the Hawk, and the Super Hornet. Components in general match a small fighter with 2 size 1 coolers and 2 size 1 power plants, but the thing that completely sets the Defender apart from the others is with the shield, as it's the only small fighter on this list that comes with a size 2 shield, which is really meant for ships like the Vanguard, or the Freelancer, or the Cutlass. So if you compare the size 2 or the 2 size 1 shield output on the Super Hornet, for example, that's 3000 HP by default. While the 1 size 2 on the Defender is more than twice that, coming in at 7500 HP, which is a total game changer. Beyond the shield, the ship is around middle of the pack with hull durability coming in at 14,100 and a pretty great HP pool of the body, which is 4000 HP. Which is what ends up being a little bit strange, though, is that the numbers actually suggest that you only have a nose HP of 50, which basically means that any rounds that actually hit that area should theoretically take the ship out if you don't have shields on. I've done some testing with an Orgnate, and while I did notice that there were some strange anomalies around the nose, nothing really indicated there was a magic kill spot on the front of the ship, so if it's there, I certainly haven't found it yet. The Defender has an interesting design where you have these arms that kind of extend out in front of the ship, and in one sense the cockpit is clear of struts, so you have clear visibility. But you do have the large arms that reach out in front of you that block a lot of what could be great visibility in a ship. The arms also meant that the Defender has a rather large body, specifically at around 33 meters long, meaning there's just a lot of ship there to hit. Granted, the arms don't meet in the middle, so there is some, open gaps for rounds to pass through, but it's not exactly a small target to land shots on. From a flight model perspective, it flies pretty well, while not particularly impressive. Its pitch values are less than a Super Hornet, while being slightly better in the yaw direction, but where it really struggles is in the roll category, almost coming in at about half of what the Gladius's ability is. It flies with a lot of control, but most of these other ships are going to outturn it. It does quite a bit better than the medium ships do, so it's in a strange place where the best prey may be a little bit larger than it is, while able to hold its own against smaller ships, assuming you opt for smart engagement. Acceleration and the 6 degrees of flight are also adequate, while being lower than some of the other fighters that we're covering, and better than the medium ships. Overall, the Defender's a cool ship with a fun design. It's got good weaponry and best-in-class durability because of the shield. It is worth a look, but I would probably say that this is a ship that you suggest kind of buying in the game because the price per UEC is a value compared to the real-world price of buying it with your money. The other ship that we need to cover is the Glaive. And the Glaive is a human recreation of the Vandal ship. The Glaive is a fighter that the Vandal aces tended to get as an award when they became better and better and had more kills. It's bigger, it's slower than the Scythe, but with a lot more firepower than the Scythe. And it doesn't have that asymmetric design. It does have the extendable blades on both sides of the ship, and those blades should eventually work in the game to cut through armor and to mess up components, but for now, they don't do you a whole lot of good. I also think that's really more of a novelty than anything, especially on the glaive being quite a bit more sluggish than the faster and more agile scythe. It also just seems like a really complicated thing to use and probably something hard to develop. The glaive is the most expensive ship on this list by far, coming in at $350. So right there alone, I pretty much say that this is a hard pass, but we'll go ahead and talk the details. The glaive has 2 size 1 shields, coolers, and 1 power plant, so it very much matches the other fighters on the list for components that it brings along, even though that the power plant that it has by default tends to be one of the better options in the class. The weaponry is interesting because currently you have no option to swap what it brings along, but what it does have is pretty potent. 2 size 5 cannons and 2 size 1s, giving it a total alpha damage of 1213, which is very much the highest on this list. Now that certainly doesn't make this the best in class or the most deadly ship on the list, as the cannons are slow firing and slow traveling rounds. So landing shots on targets is not really a sure thing. You also tend to have convergence issues in that the size 5s and the size 1s have very different velocities, so you tend to need to use the size 1s to eat up the shields and then let the 5s eat. The durability is similar to the Defender with a total health pool of 14,102. You get 2,400 on the nose, 4,400 for the body, so nothing is particularly vulnerable in looking at the numbers. The glaive is a lot like the Talon or the Hawk, though, where you have a lot of pieces that hang off the ship that can kind of get blown off in combat, and depending on what you lose, the flight model can suffer as a result. The flight model of this ship is also worse than the Defender, which we just determined to be sluggish compared to the other fighters. It has a worse pitch and yaw and only slightly better roll, but considering how bad the roll is on the Defender, it's not really saying a lot. Acceleration-wise, the glaive is sluggish in 5 of the 6 degrees. If you remember the conversation we had when I covered the 325, we uncovered that the down strafe being the best direction for acceleration on the 325, and that same applies to the glaive. Downward acceleration is greater than that of the Gladius, meaning that if you can circle strafe while leveraging the downward strafe as your primary directional objective, you can perform far above expectations that people would think that you could do in this ship. Though if you have to adapt to another change from your enemy's flight model, you're then maybe potentially going to be in some trouble because you're now on the not great accelerating vectors. Overall, the glaive has some potential to be good, but in all actuality, it's got to be one of the worst $350 you can spend in the game and expect performance as a result. I think there will be a balance pass on this at some point, but with the current state of the glaive, it's a very hard pass for me. So now that we've gotten the last 2 ships out of the way, let's go ahead and run through the best in class and why you should lean towards some of the ships on the list. I have my favorites, but I think we can also be pretty objective looking at the numbers and hopefully make good recommendations to get you what is right for you. We'll go ahead and start off with what I personally think is best in class when it comes to light fighters, and that's the Aegis Gladius. The closest comparison to the Gladius is the Arrow, and these are both typically 2 of the most commonly flown fighters by elite pilots. And the reasons are pretty easy to see. They're fast, they're small and hard to hit, they have decent weapons, and they control in a way that you would expect them to. Overall, I'm only going to pick one of these 2 as getting the recommendation, and the Gladius gets that title because it has better acceleration values in almost every direction. It's faster in a straight line, it offers a better missile loadout, it has more hull HP, and the second shield that the Arrow lacks is just hugely detrimental. Overall, if you want the best flying and fighting ship on the list, it's really hard to top what the Gladius can give you. I'm comfortable giving the Arrow an honorable mention on this list because it is a mean little ship, but the Gladius basically just outclasses it in basically every way. Now, there are going to be some of you that care less about the well-balanced ship and have different preferences. For example, if you're interested in a ship that focuses on doing more damage, then the Buccaneer should be where you're looking. The size 4 hardpoint, along with the 2 size 1s and the 2 size 3s, you end up on the top of the list for the potential damage output. And having the larger size hardpoints, you get a little bit more future-proofing and ability once armor comes into the game. I also love the number of hardpoints, allowing you to be able to start mixing and matching your weapon types to be most effective in a variety of situations. For example, some distortions and laser cannons to be able to knock down shields and deal with your NPCs without expending ammo. But then maybe you have a size 4 Gatling or ballistic cannon, and you can punch even higher up on the chart without sacrificing your overall capabilities. It really just is an attractive option as a weapons platform. And while the buck isn't particularly agile, the acceleration values aren't that great. Its top speed is admirable. And it doesn't have the ability to really sit down and really just slug it out like a Hornet or a proper brawler, but it has quite a bit more HP than something like the Gladius or the other smaller and lighter ships. So it's not as durable, but even if you're not able to sit there and take as much damage, you're able to sit there and put out a ton of damage. Speaking of a brawler in the Hornets, I really like the Super Hornet as well. Specifically because the canard turret on the nose gives you the option to bring 2 size 1s. And with the weapons balance that's in place now, that ability to bring 2 size 1s instead of 1 gimbaled 2 or a fixed 3, you end up seeing your DPS climb upward. Even if relatively prone to taking damage that the canard is, it seems to be a little bit better than it was before. Combining that with 2 size 2s on the ball turret or an option to drop a size 4 there, you get versatility and damage output equaling out to about the same as the Buccaneer. The flight model is a little bit worse than the Buck, but not by a large margin, and what you get for the slight drop in the flight performance is about 500 HP more over the Buck, meaning that this is your best bet of the light fighters to hang around in a fight and duke it out. The Super Hornet is always one of my favorite NPC bounty hunting ships, and the only real gap that it has is when dealing with the largest targets where the slower flight performance of the Super Hornet makes it harder to evade the turrets, or potentially going against other players doing PvP in lighter ships, which makes getting good firing solutions challenging. Overall, if you want to take on larger targets and are comfortable keeping lighter fighters off your back, you can end up being really effective leveraging a Buccaneer or a Super Hornet while having a lot of versatility in what you do with them in combat, and they both get a pretty hard recommendation on my list. Now, I feel I wouldn't be doing the recommendation justice here if I didn't include something a little more focused on missiles as well. And the one that I want to hit here is the Talon Shrike. Not everybody is a great pilot, and the Shrike can help mitigate that to some degree if you're still interested in doing combat. One of the best flight models of the ships that we've covered here. The stealthiest option on the list, allowing you to have a little bit more time to sneak into a good position before you're identified. It's got a wicked missile loadout capability, and that it means that you're able of ending a lot of different ships. Albeit in kind of an expensive fashion because missiles aren't cheap to rearm. And with the DPS changes on the weapon sizes, only having 2 size 2 hardpoints isn't that bad. So while it's the lowest on the list of the ships that we've covered from a guns perspective, it's really not too far off from the rest of the ships, meaning it's still somewhat viable with guns only. The Shrike's a scary little ship. Though on anything that relies on missiles, you just need to know that your success with them will very much be determined on the patch that you're currently in and the effectiveness of countermeasures in that patch. Knowing that most of the ships only come with 5 EM countermeasures, though, picking to use non-IR missile load will mean that your missile spam should be more effective overall. The last fighter that I wanted to address with a recommendation in this video is actually the same one that we started this video with, and that's the Banu Defender. Now, I'm not going to recap all the details since we just discussed it, but with the size 2 shield, it's a game changer on a ship of this size. And when paired with a decent flight model and DPS, it's actually a pretty legit ship. Now, the way I would probably summarize these ships for picking would be like this. If you foresee PvP being your primary reason for wanting a fighter, you'll want the Gladius to really be able to keep up with the other top fighters. It's a proficient enough ship to be dangerous against larger and numerous PvE targets, even though you do lack the DPS of some of the heavier options. So while it may not be the perfect ship for those engagements, you can certainly manage, and it may just take a little bit longer than a heavier hitting ship. If you're really invested in PvE more, to make money from doing bounty hunting, for example, then I prefer the Super Hornet and the extra hull HP, meaning less time needed to go back and repair, and the extra DPS means dispatching your targets a little quicker. It's too sluggish to be a really great competitor in the PvP space, but against average players, even in faster ships, you can still end up on top. The Buccaneer, in my mind, is somewhere between these two, but mostly when you're taking advantage of the distortion weapons and their current success rates. The number of hardpoints means that you're able to disable ships or take down their shields quickly and use the massive DPS to end them pretty quick. The same applies to the PvE engagements as well, so you can still be effective in many different arenas. And then with the Defender, It's really better suited to engaging slightly larger targets since the flight model isn't that impressive, and since the NPC pilots aren't as proficient as top tier players, the flight model is easily managed and you can still find a lot of success while also being able to stay in fights longer with that larger shield. So there you have it. Picking the right light fighter, starting with a list of 20 and filtered down to overall recommendations of the Gladius, Buccaneer, Super Hornet, Shrike, and Defender. You can obviously be successful with any of the ships on this list, so don't feel like I'm saying they don't have any value, because they certainly do. I just have preferences and the numbers seem to back those up. I'm purely looking at the metrics of the ships and my experience in them to help find the ship that will meet your needs best. If you all have differing opinions, please get them in the comments. People like reading those and I like seeing what you have on your mind. Aside from that, I'd also like to remind you all that I have a Patreon and YouTube membership that allows fans to support the channel. There's some pretty nice perks that come along with joining these, so if you have any interest in supporting the channel and becoming a little more connected to a good community, there's information in the pinned comment below. I'd also like to shout out my current backers for the support that they've given along the way. It's very much appreciated. And beyond that, I just want to say that that's it for now. On the topic of light fighters, I will be moving on to another category of video as voted on by my backers, so stay tuned for those to come out pretty soon. Otherwise, thank you all for watching. Have yourselves a wonderful day, and take care.